to West Pro Series. It's your boy Osas, and in today's episode, we are going to continue with our chat reaction functionality. In the last episode, we added this reaction picker view and this custom context menu to our chat messages. In today's episode, we are going to clean up this interactive animation, and we're going to handle a couple of edge cases. The first thing I want us to pay attention to is obviously right now we're selecting a message to actually present the interactive animation, and that's not obviously what we want, because in the completed version of the project, we have to actually long press on a message in order for us to get that interactive animation to show up. So we're going to convert from deed select to an actual long press gesture. So we need to add a long press gesture recognizer to the current version of our project. The second thing I want to bring your attention to is right now we can actually even long press or select admin messages, and we don't want that. So for example, this right here is an admin message, and if we select it, look at that, we're also animating it. And as you can tell, that is not the effects or the the functionality that we expect, and that's not what we have in the completed version of the project. Something else too that I want to bring your attention to really quickly is when we select a message, for example, as you can see, we have the new date timestamp with the message. We're animating it because it's inside of the cell. Well, in this situation, I would like for us to bring the reaction picker view down just a little bit more because it seems a little far from the actual message. But that's going to be it. We're going to be handling all these different edge cases and just cleaning up our reaction functionality. So let's jump into Xcode and get started. I'm going to go right into our message list controller. Okay, and the first thing that I want us to handle is actually the long press gesture recognizer. I'm going to resume our SwiftUI preview, and while that is doing its thing, I'm going to start converting this logic from deed select to an actual long press gesture recognizer. So right now we're selecting to actually, bring up the, the custom context menu and the reaction picker view. Ideally, what we want is to long press on it to trigger it. So for us to do that, let's just go down here and actually create a function. So I'm actually going to create an extension on this entire, message list controller. And like I said a while ago, I love to use extension a lot as just a way to neatly organize my code into like little buckets. And so I'm going to create a extension. I'm just going to call it context menu interactions. Gee, I can't spell. All right, so what do I want to do with this context menu interaction? Well, I'm going to go right ahead and actually create a private method inside of there. And this is going to call setup long press gesture recognizer. So I'm going to say setup long press gesture recognizer, and we're going to set up a long press gesture, and this is going to be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is declare a long press gesture, and I'm going to say it's equals to UI long press gesture recognizer. This is the UI kit way of declaring long press gestures. It's going to ask for target, and the target is going to be self, and our selector is essentially what do we want to fire, what do we want to call when someone actually long presses on it. So I'm going to create another method here, and this method is going to be what we're going to trigger, and I'm just going to call it show context menu. I think show context menu is actually a good name. And I'm going to pass in the gesture, and it's going to be a UI long press gesture recognizer. Excuse me, guys. So now let's go right ahead and call this in here. We have to mark it as objc. Okay. And let's go right ahead and call show context menu. And we don't need to pass in the long press gesture. It's going to infer it because this is already a long press gesture. So now let us add this long press gesture to our collection view. So first off, I'm going to say I want the long press gesture. Long press gesture. I'm going to change this to a capital G. I want to add a minimum press duration. So I'm going to say long press gesture dot minimum press duration is 0.5. Okay. And then I'm going to say messages collection view. Remember, this is our list, right? And I'm going to add a gesture recognizer. Long press gesture. So let's put a print statement in here and let's see what happens when we actually long press. Make sure we trigger the preview, and let's go ahead and call the setup long press gesture recognizer in our view did load. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the top here, and this is our view did load, which is the method that is called for view controllers in UIKit. It's only called once, and it's called when your view is being loaded into memory. So let's go ahead and see what happens, and let us actually long press on any of these cells. It should yell, oh, yep. So it says show context menu, which is great. That's exactly what we want. So it says show context menu. Let's try this again. Dismiss. Show context menu. That's perfect. All right, let's jump down here and actually get started with this show context menu method. So what is this show context menu method going to do? Well, we're just going to carry everything that we have inside of our deed select method. So I'm going to collapse this attach method. But everything we have inside of this deed select method, I'm actually going to migrate it into our show context menu. So I'm going to grab everything from here, and let's just go all the way down to here. Command and C. And I'm going to call show context, not show context menu. Actually, I'm not going to call anything in here. I'm actually going to uncomment this old code that we removed from our deed select, if you remember, when we got started with this reaction picker functionality. So now I'm going to take the code that I just copied, scroll all the way down here, and paste it inside of my show context menu. Okay. So it's going to yell at us because we have a bunch of things to fix, and let's go right ahead and fix them one at a time. All right, so the first thing we're going to fix is this selected cell. It doesn't know what a selected cell is because we no longer have an index path. That's only available to us through the UI collection view delegate method of did_select. So we need to find a way to actually know the selected cell that the user has tapped or that the user long pressed on. And before we even do that, let's just create a guard statement up here. We only want to fire this when guards gesture.state. And the reason I'm putting this guard statement really quickly is if you notice when I long pressed a while ago, it's actually showing twice. And I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm just going to comment all of this out really quickly. I'm going to comment all of this out. Let me just go ahead and comment all of this out. And let's just create this show context menu method all over again really quickly. And I'm going to show you what I mean. Okay, let's throw a print statement in here. And it's going to say show context menu. And so when we long press on an individual message, let us make sure our SwiftUI preview console is working. You're going to notice this show context menu is going to fire twice. So look at that. It fires twice, which we don't want that, right? We only want it to fire once, especially when we're showing the context menu. And so this guard statement, I'm just going to create a guard statement. I'm just going to say I want it to only fire if the long press gesture state is equals to began, else ignore. Because if not, it's going to fire even when it ends, and we don't want that. So let us clear our console. Let's long press. Let's see what, actually, I removed the print statement. You know what? I'm going to create a new print statement. Show context menu. And let us long press now, and let's see what happens. So it should only fire once. Show context menu. You see that? That only fires once, which is perfect. All right, let's go right ahead and continue with our logic. I'm going to remove this one and uncomment this one that I just, commented out. And let's go ahead and add that gesture state. So I'm going to say guard gesture state is equals to began, else, return out of the scope. So how do we get our selected cell? Well, we can actually get the point that the user is pressing on. And the way we're going to do that is thanks to this long press gesture. So I'm going to say let point, essentially where is the user's finger when they're long pressing on the phone. So it's going to be equals to gesture.location. It's going to ask for where in specific are we referring to. And this is just a message collection view. And let's see, there we can create an index path using this point. So I'm going to say guard let index path is going to be messages collection view dot index path for points. Index path for item at points. That's the one I'm looking for. Let me create a little bit more spacing so you guys can see what I'm doing. So now we can create an index path thanks to the collection view method index path for method. And I'm just going to take this points right here, which is the point that the user has selected as long pressed on. So for example, if I long press around here, that means I should be able to get the position, the index of this cell. Or if I long press around here, it shouldn't matter. I should still be able to get the specific cell. So that's the logic we're trying to do here. And then if that is not, available, let's just return out of the scope because that means we don't know the selected item. So now we're going to take this index path and we're going to pass that here. And now this is yelling at us because there's no such thing as collection view, and that is true. It's called message collection view. And I should fix that. And so let's see what happens. Actually, I think that has fixed all of our issues. So now let's go right ahead and actually long press on a message and let's see if it animates out. So this is the moment of truth. Long press, beautiful guys, look at that. And when we select out, it dismisses. Long press, dismiss. So let's go ahead and run this on a simulator really quickly. And so we make sure that our messages are actually performing as expected. But yeah, let's jump into a channel, and select a specific message. So if you select a message, you'll notice it doesn't do anything, right? Doesn't really do anything, which is exactly what we want because we're going to add a different action to a selected message. So if you select a message, it's going to play the media player like it used to, which is exactly what we want. But what happens when we long press on that message? It animates out. That's exactly what we want. Long press, animates out. Long press, animates out. All right, that looks pretty beautiful. So we have handled the first part of our equation, which is this long press, animation. The second bit that I want us to handle is when a specific message was, each messages, if they have this new date, if they have this batch and timestamp. So for example, if I long press on this, as you can see, the reaction picker view is so much further out, and compared to something like this message right here, where the reaction picker view is sitting right on top of the focused view. So let's go right ahead and fix that. And it's going to be very simple. We just need to add some sort of a logic into our, so I'm going to scroll all the way down here. And actually, I'm going to migrate, before we do anything, I'm going to migrate some of these other functions here. So I'm going to migrate this attach menu action items and this dismiss context menu method. I'm going to migrate both of them into this other extension that we just created right here. So right below the setup gesture recognizer, right below the show context menu method, I'm going to paste those two methods. So now we have a little bit of, separation, like things are nicely separated. So like I was saying, I would like for us to add a little bit of space into our, to our messages when they have a timestamp above them. And the way we're going to do that is, so right here in our reaction host view, right here, the top anchor is asking for a constant. And right now we're just saying the constant is like this, it's just static. We're just saying the constant is going to be 5. Well, we need to make it dynamic. We need to know if the message has a new date timestamp. If it does have a new date timestamp, then we want to change it. We want to add something like 45, right? We want to bring it closer because like you saw in this in this version of our project, the current version of our project, let's say we scroll all the way up here, right? This reaction picker view, there's a big distance between this and this. And so let's push it down just a little bit. And we're just going to change this from 5 to 45, but we're going to make it dynamic. So I want to know if the message has a new day. And I'm just going to say, is new day is equals to message. Actually, we could use view model dot new day, and it's going to ask for the message. And the message is going to be our message that we're getting. It's going to ask for an index. So how do we get an index inside of here? Actually, instead of calculating here, let's just ask for the new day property right off here. So I'm just going to go right here and I'm just going to ask for is new day inside of our attached menu action items. And it's going to be a Boolean. And so this is going to yell at us here if we scroll up here, because we have a new property now. And so now I'm going to paste this here and I'm just going to say view model.isNewDay for message at index paths, because remember, we have an index path inside of this method that we just created, this index path right here. So I'm going to say it's index paths dot item, which is just the index. And so now let's use this is new day. Why is this yelling at us? Let's see. Oh, actually, yeah, this is it's new day. I'm sorry. And this is index paths dot item. Okay. Now let's go ahead and use this is new day to actually, like I said, change the position of this 5. So I'm going to create a little bit of spacing so I see what we're working with here. So instead of 5, I would like for us to have some sort of a reaction pattern view. So I'm going to create a property up here and I'm just going to call it let reaction. What's a good name? Reaction pattern. And it's going to be of type CG float. And I'm just going to say is new day, right? If it's a new day, then it's 45. Because like I said, I want to bring it down just a little bit. If it's not a new day, then it's just 5, which is the regular one. So I'm going to take this reaction pattern and I'm going to paste it right here for our reaction host VC. And I think that's all we need. So let's go right ahead, run our project, and let's see what that looks like. So let's jump into a channel. Let's scroll all the way up here. And let us select, for example, this message C. Look at that. That looks so much better than the initial version. And everything stays the same. If it's a regular message, if it's not a new day, when we long press on it, everything stays exactly the same. All right, one more thing I would like for us to do really quickly is admin messages. Right now, we can actually long press on admin messages, and obviously we don't want that. So let's go right ahead and guard against that. And it's going to be a very simple solution. So if we scroll all the way up here, inside of our show context menu, all we need to do is have some sort of a logic that says, hey, if this is an admin message, don't show the context menu. It's pretty much that simple. And let's see, how do we do that? I'm just going to say guard message. So I'd like for us to check the message type. So I want something like, just right after we get our index paths, I can say something like guard message. Do we have a message here? I'm going to move the message all the way up here. So we have a message here. I'm just going to move this message all the way up here to the beginning of our method. And so I'm going to say guard message dot type. Remember, we have message type. And all I want to say is if the message dot type is equals to admin message, so I want something like is admin message. Something like that. I think that should work. If it's equals to false, else return out of the scope. So if it's an admin message, right, don't show this context menu. So right now, there's no such thing like that on our type, and we need to go and create that on our message type. So I'm going to command and jump into the message type. Just jump into that bad boy. And right here inside of our message type, which is our message type item, our message items plus types file, I am going to create another computer property, and I'm going to call it is admin message. It's going to be a Boolean property. And I'm just going to say if case.admin, hold on, I'm just going to say if, I don't want to switch in self, if self is equals to dot admin, or actually, what's a good syntax? If case.admin is equals to self, return true, else return false. Okay, so that means it's an admin message. That makes sense. So I'm going to take this isAdmin computer property. I'm going to jump back to our message list controller, and let's go right ahead and use that. And that should work now, actually. Yep. And so let's go ahead and run our project in the simulator, and let's see what happens when we try to long press on an admin message. It should actually ignore it. So let's jump right in here. Let's jump in here. Let's scroll all the way back to the top. And let's long press on this message. Look at that. Nothing happens because, again, we have this guard statement right here that is saying, hey, I'm only going to show the context menu if it's not an admin message. So, but if we select on this, it animates. And if we select on this, it animates. What about this one? It animates. That looks absolutely beautiful. And let's try this. That animates as well. That's awesome, guys. So there's one final bit that I would like for us to fix before we wrap up this episode. And I'm going to show you what I mean really quickly. What I mean is, let's say we have a super long message, okay? And let's say we select an image, just, something nice. Hit that send button, right? This is a super long message. And let's say we try to animate this. As you can see, the context menu is, it barely has enough spacing. And actually, let me demo this again. Let me paste this message twice, and let me add an image on top of that. Maybe like this image, right? Something that's obviously super massive. Let's hit that send button, and let's try to long press on the super long message with a super long photo. This is obviously an edge case, right? When we long press on it, look at what happens. We don't have a reaction picker view, and we don't have a context menu. So obviously, we need to fix that really quickly. And the solution to that is going to be for us to scale down this specific message or this specific cell. And this is what that looks like in the completed version of the project. Let's say we have a super long message. Let's say we long press on it. We have this nice scale animation, or you can think of it as we're shrinking it down just a little bit, right? And that should be more than enough to handle that specific edge case for us. So I'm going to jump into our, message list controller. And here's what we're going to do inside of our, what's the name of this method again? Inside of the show context menu method in our message list controller, we need to transform the specific, the focused view. So let me go ahead and refresh our SwiftUI preview and show you what I actually mean. And so really, let's say we take the focused view, and we have a transform properties on every UI view in UI kit. And the transformation is just what allows us to be able to scale it down, scale it up, or move it up and down. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use CG affine transform, okay? And it allows us to be able to transform the specific view. And in this case, we want to use scale. So it's going to ask for scale X and Y. For the X, we're going to use 0.5, which just means we want to scale it down by 50%. And same thing for the Y, we want to scale it down by 50%. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And remember, we're inside of an animation block, so it's going to animate this. Let's go ahead and long press on a specific message. Look at that. You notice how it scaled it down, right? Obviously, that's jumpy. But that would be the solution to the bug that we just experienced. And so the other thing we need to add to it is to also translate it. So we're going to scale it down, and then we're going to translate it, which just means we're going to shrink it down and we're going to move it. And here's what we're going to use. We're going to use concatenation, which just means we're joining two transformations together. And I'm going to go ahead and create a translation right here. I'm just going to say let's translation. And it's just going to be a CG affine transform. And I want to use, let's see. I'm going to use translation. And so translation X is going to be across the X axis. And the Y, so for the Y, I'm going to pass in the 1. And for the X, I'm just going to say let's X translation, which means where do we want to move it across the horizontal axis? So I'm going to say if the message direction, if it's an incoming message, if it's received, I'm going to say -80. Else, if it's a message that we are sending, I'm going to say 80. So I'm going to take this X translation and pass it into this. And then I'm going to concatenate this translation to our scaling right here. And so let's go right ahead and run our project. This is yelling at us. I'm not really sure why. And let us call this CG floats. So let us, CG floats. And let us go ahead and resume our SwiftUI preview. Let's long press on the message. And as you can see, it's essentially scaling it down. And at the same time, it's moving it to the left or to the right. And the reason I'm doing that is because if I don't have this translation and I just scale it down, it's just going to scale down to the center. And so, for example, let's say I scale this down. It's just going to scale down to the center. Let's run it on the actual iOS simulator so you see, what it looks like on the simulator, especially with the last message that we just sent in this channel. So we have this long message. If we long press on it, right, it scales it down to about 50% of that specific view. And look at what happens. It just jumps out of view. There's obviously a bunch of bugs going on. Let's try this one. This feels more realistic. Let's long press on this. As you can see, it's just scaling it down to the center, shrinking it down to the middle. Well, we want to shrink it down and then we want to move it to the right if it's a message that we sent, or we want to shrink it down and move it to the left if it's a message that was sent to us. So that's essentially what this logic right here is doing. So let's go ahead and uncomment our concatenation. Let's run our SwiftUI simulator and let's see what it looks like on the simulator now with the concatenation. So I'm going to jump in here. And honestly, I'm not going to use this one because this is not realistic. In a real project, you're probably going to add a limit to the amount of message that someone can actually type in, a character limit to your text field. So let's try this one. Let's say, for example, look at that. So we scale down to the left, which is beautiful. Scale down to the left. Obviously, when we try to dismiss, you're noticing a bug, right? And it's not going back to its initial position. It's kind of confused. And so for us to fix that, we're going to revert it back to its identity. And when we say something as an identity, it just means we're returning it back to its original position or size. And so the way we're going to do that is inside of our dismiss method. So right here, we're going to say, let's see. All we need to do inside of this dismiss method is just to say focused view.transform. So I'm going to, do I want to do it at the top of the frame? So right here, I'm going to just say focused view dot transform is equals to identity. Again, it's just going to return it to its original position. So let's go ahead and run it on the simulator and let's see what that looks like. Jump right in here, and let us try this message. Let's, long press on it. It does that. What about when we dismiss it? Look at that. It returns it back to its initial position. But obviously, there's a new bug now because the reaction picker view and the context menu, they're now so far away from our message. Also, not to mention, we don't actually want to scale every single message because this message, for example, does not need to be scaled because we know both the context menu and the reaction picker view will have enough spacing to be drawn on our screen. So we need to come up with a logic that allows us to only scale messages when we know that the message is going to be longer than the specific, the message is going to be too long and there will not be enough spacing for our context menu to be visible. So let's jump into our message list controller and do just that. So the first thing I want us to do is we're going to be using this reaction pattern. But before we even do that, let's come up here. Let's go down here and actually create a function inside of our message list controller that's going to be responsible for determining if we want to scale our cell or not. So I'm going to say, I think a better name is like shrink cell. And so we're going to shrink cell. The first thing we want to take in is we want to take in the cell height, meaning what's the height of the cell we're actually trying to shrink. And then we're going to return a Boolean value. So this is what we're going to use to determine if we're going to scale down the cells or not. So what do we want to do? Well, let's first say we want to get the screen height. And I'm just going to say screen height is UI window scene. And I'm going to use this current dot screen height computer property that we created a while ago. And let's just default this to 0. New quad, let's set to 0. And let's see, let me wrap this inside of a bracket. And then I'm going to divide it by 1.2. And I'm also going to get the spacing for the menu view. So I'm going to say the spacing for the menu view is going to be the screen height minus the cell height. So I'm going to say if the screen height, if this spacing for menu view is greater than 190, if it's less than 190. So essentially what I'm trying to do is, this is pretty much just trial and error with what I came up with this logic, right? I'm just saying if there's at least about 190 spacing of this context menu from the bottom of our screen, then we are good, okay? If there's not enough spacing, then of course we want to shrink our cell, right? And so like the 190 again is just the spacing from the bottom. And so I'm going to say if I'm going to return, so it's going to return spacing for menu view. If it's less than 190, then we want to shrink the cell. If it's not less than 190, we want to leave the cell the same way it is. There's no need to shrink it. And this 1.2 is, I'm just guessing the height, because remember, we're animating our selected cell to the center of our screen. So it's not actually the center. It's more like around the 1.2 distance or 1.5 distance from our screen, because we're saying minus 60. So let's go ahead and take this shrink cell and let's actually use it inside of here. So I'm going to scroll all the way to our into our show context menu method. And right here where we're doing our translation, we're only going to do translation if we're actually able to shrink our cell. And here's what I mean, right? So I'm going to create a method here. I'm just going to create a property here. I'm just going to say let shrink cell is equals to shrink cell, the method, and it's going to ask for the cell height. So what is going to be the cell height? That's the question. Well, we're going to use the starting frame, because remember we have a starting frame, right? And we're just going to get the height because it's a CGRect, and CGRects have height properties. And so this should not be optional, because I'm pretty sure I thought we were guarding against it, but if not, let's just default it to 0. But again, it's never really going to be 0. We're just unwrapping it. So we're going to take the shrink cell and we're going to say if shrink cell, that's the only time that we're actually going to scale down and translate our, cell. So let's go ahead and resume our SwiftUI preview, and you're going to see what I mean. So none of these guys are actually going to shrink because they have more than enough spacing to draw both the reaction and the context menu. So let's long press an item. Look at that. It doesn't shrink, right? Long press an item. It does not shrink. Let's go ahead and run it on the simulator. And this bad boy right here, the last messages that we sent should actually shrink. And so let's jump into this channel and let's long press on this message. Look at that. That actually shrinks, right? Which is exactly what we want. What about this guy? This guy actually shrinks. But what about this text right here? We shouldn't be shrinking this text. Does it shrink? No, it does not. It looks beautiful. That is awesome, guys. Obviously, like I said, there's all this spacing. Let us go ahead and fix the spacing really quickly. And so I'm going to jump into Xcode again. And the way we're going to fix the spacing is by using this shrink cell logic that we just created. And we're going to use it to sort of determine how much spacing we want to have between our focused view and any of these host controllers that we are creating inside of our attach menu action items method. And so this reaction pattern, I would like to add, I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to say shrink cell is going to be shrink cell, the method. And the cell height, like I said, is going to be starting frame dot height, which means the original height of the cell. And then right here, I'm going to increment the reaction pattern based on that. So I'm going to say if shrink cell, if we're shrinking the cell, we want the distance between our reaction and the actual focused view to be much more. We want to increase the padding. We want to push it down a little bit more. So I'm going to say reaction padding is going to be, let's see, what's a good thing? I'm going to say something like plus equals, I'm going to use starting frame dot height divided by 3. Okay. And I'm also going to do the same thing for our, so I'm going to copy this. I'm actually going to do the same thing for our menu view. And you see what I mean, right? So for example, this menu view, as you saw in the simulator just now, this menu view for this, it's so further down here. We need to push it up so it's closer to the actual message. And we're going to do that by creating a property right here. And we're just going to call it, what's a good name? Something like menu padding. Excuse me, guys. So we're going to say menu padding, and it's going to be a CG floats. And let's just default it to 0. And then we're going to paste the shrink code, but we're going to say, we're going to make it a variable so we can change it. So we're going to say if menu padding, if we're shrinking the cell, we actually want to decrease it. We want to decrease it to be something like, -50 or -60. So it's as close to the actual cell as possible. So I'm going to say something like divided by 2.5. And again, I've experimented with this off screen. That's why I know a lot of these values. And this is really what you'll find with a lot of animation. You just have to experiment with a specific value or, the specific animation style that you want. Excuse me, guys. I'm starting to lose my voice from recording so much today. Anyway, so now that we have our shrink cell, we're going to take this menu padding and we're going to use that as the constant for our actual menu. So I'm going to say instead of like just menu, I'm going to pass in, instead of 0, I'm going to pass in menu value, menu padding in the top anchor padding for our message menu host VC. So let's go ahead and run our project on the simulator, and that should fix the last bit of bug that I have in mind. So let us jump in here. Let us jump into a message. And let us scroll up here and let us long press this bad boy. And look at that. That's exactly the sort of thing that I have in mind. So it pushes the reaction picker view down a little bit, and it pushes up the context menu up a little bit. So that way it's close to it. But what about this? That looks just perfect. It looks the same, right? Nothing changes. And again, the reason is because of the shrink cell logic. And the shrink cell logic is pretty simple. Like I said, we're just checking short to make sure the distance between this cell and the bottom of the screen is not less than 190, because I've estimated that the actual menu view is around 180, 170. So we want to give it enough spacing. And if the distance is less than 190, that means there's not enough spacing to actually draw this context menu. And in that case, we're going to choose to shrink our cell like we're doing right here. And so that's pretty much it for this. And as for this super long message, I'm not really going to handle this edge case. I think this tutorial has already shown you sort of the mindset and how to approach something like this. In an actual production environment, obviously, you probably would have to add some sort of a limit to how many text, the character limit, you had a character limit to your actual message text field. So that way someone can actually handle or enter a text message that's super, super long. And so if you want, you can go right ahead and extend this functionality, do whatever you need to do with it. But pretty much this handles all of our reaction functionality. And I'm going to go ahead and explain this so that we can wrap up this episode. And in the next episode, we're actually going to add the functionality that allows us to be able to call the backend and actually react to a message. So essentially what's going on again is one final recap. And I'm actually just going to write it down and right up here. Excuse me, guys. So essentially, when we're long pressing a message, we're not actually animating that message. We take a screenshot of the message, right? And then we add that screenshot into something we're calling a focused view. So it's that focused view that we animate to the center. That focused view is from, this left. It spans all the entire screen width, but then the height is the same height of our actual message. And then when we get to the center of the screen, we show a blur view, right? We anchor a blur view to the screen. And so the blur view is what kind of creates that focused effect. And then when we tap on the blur view, we remove the blur view, we animate our focused view back to its original position, we remove the focused view, right? And then we show our message again. And that's really what's creating this nice effect. As for the reaction picker view, all we're doing is inside of our reaction picker view, which is a SwiftUI view, we're animating it on appearance. So as you can see with this on appear block, we're using this animate background view to actually animating it. And we're animating each individual element upon appearance. So that's what's creating that nice effect. But that's pretty much it for this episode, guys. I hope you guys really appreciate and enjoy this, because this is actually pretty difficult to build, if I'm being honest. It's a complex animation. You have to break it down into its individual elements to really understand what's going on. But I wanted to show you guys what it's like to try to create an animation that uses not just SwiftUI, right? There's a lot of SwiftUI animations out there, but uses SwiftUI, uses UIKit, uses both SwiftUI and UIKit components, and also orchestrates everything together nicely to create the seamless interactive animation. So that's going to be it for me in this episode. In the next episode, we're going to add the actual reaction functionality that allows us to be able to like a message like you just saw, and it's going to show up. So let's say, for example, we, put a prayer button right here. It pops up right there, and it's going to give it this nice, this nice presentation. And of course, we're also going to have the selected, reaction that we used before, the latest one. So that's pretty much it for this episode, guys. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Please like and subscribe. Peace.